Welcome to Encountering Christ, a podcast about meeting Jesus in the ordinary moments of life, learning how to invite others into those encounters, and exploring practical ways to recognize Christ at work in our daily rhythms. Our prayer is that this time helps you see and share Christ more clearly. Today, we begin a process of looking at God's communicable attributes. These are attributes that God has shared with us more fully. Now, what we're trying to do is hard. Describing who God is an impossible task, and so mankind tries to make it easier on ourselves. Mankind tries to break it down in ways that are easier for us to understand. So, when it comes to God's communicable attributes, we're going to break those down into 4 categories and then look at the attributes in each category. Now, the 4 categories of God's communicable attributes that we're going to look at are those attributes that describe God's being, God's mental attributes, God's moral attributes, and God's attributes of purpose. Now, what is interesting to note is that God has given you and I, all of these categories as humans. God has given us existence or being. He's given us mental and moral capabilities, as well as God has given us a need for purpose. These attributes of God, then, are attributes that He has given us a taste of or built us for. Not that we have them at the same level that He has them, but that we can kind of understand them better from who He has created us to be. So, let's get started. The first category of God's communicable attributes are those attributes that describe God's being. And the first one we'll look at is this: God is a spiritual being. God Himself does not have flesh and blood like us. John 4:24 says it simply: God is spirit. God does not have a size or dimension. Now I'm a little over 6 feet tall, and you are a height. God is not a height, nor is He a size. In fact, you cannot make a likeness of Him. More than that, He forbids us to do so. Exodus 20, verse 4 and 5. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. One of the reasons God forbids us to make an idol or image of Him is that this would change our understanding of who He is. We are not to try and understand Him in the form of anything that we can build. He's not material in nature. God is different from everything He created. You can't shoot God with a gun. You can't kill Him. You can't physically touch Him. God is not made of any kind of matter like those physical things He created, for God is spirit. Whatever that means, it means that God is unlike everything else. To put this in a definition, God's spirituality means that God exists as a being that is not made of any matter, has no parts or dimensions, is unable to be perceived by our bodily senses, and is more excellent than any other kind of existence. However, that does not mean that we cannot touch Him, speak to Him, or relate to Him spiritually, for we are spirit. One of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis is this: you do not have a spirit. No, you are a spirit. You have a body. And it is in this sense that I have to ask you, who are you? You see, unlike anything else in this Genesis creation, God has specifically designed us as humans to be able to know Him, touch Him, feel Him, and relate with Him spiritually. Now, I say this knowing that we live in a culture that has increasingly denied or belittled the existence of our soul, denied our spirit, if you will. Our current world teaches us that our conscience, our moral sense of what is right or wrong, is a part of our brain alone, that our emotions are merely a physical reaction toward a physical end. that our existence is merely a physical birth to death experience, that we are a body and a body alone. Now, in my view, this comes more from a preconceived notion than an investigation into the existential and obvious evidence. And this preconceived notion that hinders seeing the obvious is that the only things that exist are things that can potentially be seen with the eyes, touched, or felt. In contrast, I would say a belief in the existence of God is rational. The fact that there is natural law and natural order most rationally reveals not only the need for God, but the evidence of God's existence. God and science are not exclusive of one another. John Lennox illustrated this succinctly by stating, "Asking someone to choose between God and science is like asking someone to choose between Henry Ford and the automobile. It is senseless to discount the maker and only look at the automobile. Why is there something rather than nothing?" Now, that argument speaks of God's existence, but not his nature. How do we know that God is spirit and that we have a spirit? I would argue that our spiritual being is just as obvious as an automobile, because our spiritual being answers the question of why. Our spiritual being designates the difference between right and wrong, as we have an inborn understanding that is born out of what we sense to be right or wrong. And that this sense, if left on its own, is universal among humans. From a more practical perspective, when a loved one passes away, I hurt in my soul, and it is beyond a mere chemical reaction. And it's beyond a reaction that goes away when my body starts to feel better. My love for my wife is beyond a chemical reaction. My anger over injustice, whether personal or in the world, is more than my desire to survive. And I could go on for days. The idea that our morals and desires are mere chemical reactions is functionally ludicrous. I have a soul. And my soul is who I am. And my soul defines my soul defines me way beyond how I look. I hope you hear what we're talking about today. I am a soul. I have a body. Now, all of those arguments are made from the evidence of our existence. What I have yet to mention is what the Bible says. Not only is God spirit, listen how it progresses. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. So how do I worship and get to know God? In spirit and in truth. And so here is the takeaway. When my soul is filled with clinging to and responding to the very spiritual presence of God, I find life. I find meaning and the purpose of my existence. I love the way it's put in Philippians 2, 1 and 2. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. The Spirit of God in our soul not only changes how we see God, it changes how we live our lives. So let this truth permeate your soul. God is spirit, and when we worship him in spirit and in truth, that's when we find a life we were created for. God bless.